good, YouTube? It's your girl, Asia.
And it's your boy, BJ.
Back in the building.
Back in effect. Back like we never left. And y'all, we back in the building. Back for another reaction. And we appreciate y'all for tuning in. Today, we're going to be checking out Thomas Sowell. He's going to be touching on the facts about slavery never being mentioned in school.
Yeah, this is actually... What's crazy that I saw this too. Somebody actually sent this to me in my DMs and was requesting that we look at this because I guess we did the Jordan Peterson video. Mm-hmm. Was it Jordan Peterson? No, it was Ben Shapiro and
and Malcolm.
Malcolm Nance, yeah, and they were kind of going back and forth with the critical race theory, and they were like, you need to check out this video. So I saw this and I was like, ooh.
Yeah, and Thomas Sowell, he's a pretty profound professor too. So
yeah,
I would be very interested to see what he has to say.
Here's one thing too, and I just want to put this out there, y'all. This is us. Like, we don't. Okay, I'll speak for myself. I feel like I don't touch a lot, in my personal life on politics enough for me to give advice or speak soundly or to you know what I mean. This is me trying to understand it all and just get a better understanding, a better knowledge, a better perspective, just kind of broaden my own knowledge on things that people see differently or in retrospect of what's actually been put out there from a political standpoint. So if y'all can't understand that we're not putting it out there to create the controversy, to give anybody any type of shine or limelight or glisten them, and you know what I mean, because we're putting them out there, it's that's not the case here for me. At least I feel like I'm just trying to just learn and just gather it from a different point of view and different perspective of reading through comments and creating that conversation. And I know we say that all the time, but I just had to say that, okay, because I get tired of people putting it out there like, oh, y'all are giving this clown, oh, it's this person. Oh, y'all shouldn't be doing, you know what I mean? And it's like...
I mean, I see the comments.
I can see that, hey, I get it. Yeah. Let me just figure out who I like and who I don't like. I don't know who I don't like and who I like, y'all.
Hey, all I gotta say is it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be all right.
It is, but it's not to stir up mess, okay? That's all I'm gonna say. It's not to stir up mess. It's just for me to just... I want to learn it. I want to understand it. I want to know why people feel the way they feel. Why people are angry, okay? Yeah. Not angry. Why they agree. Why they disagree. Can we agree to disagree on things without having the controversy?
I know. I agree.
And the fights. That's it. So, sorry. Okay, now, we can go ahead and jump into it.
Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
Facts about slavery never mentioned in school.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Okay. Here we go, y'all. Untold facts about slavery. Uh-oh.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Before the modern era, by and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only...
What?
You know what? Yeah, I mean, I've even read throughout history that everything that he's saying so far, yeah, is definitely true.
Wow. Okay. So slavery was within like the culture of where you were actually where. It wasn't necessarily just based off of so Africans, he's like it was based off of vulnerability, not
more along the lines of like a social class. Like if you're like the lower social class in that country or nation, you probably would be a slave.
A slave. Oh.
Relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself. Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by." This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by Roots.
Yeah, Alex Haley, like The Roots, that's like one of those movies, especially like the book too. That's like one of the books that I kind of just grew up like seeing and reading a lot. Like my mom was like, "You got to read this book. You need to sit down and read this book, you know, so you can kind of gain a knowledge for yourself about a lot of things that happen throughout history rather than you feeling like you have to go to school and sit down and be taught certain things that's, you know, you might not get the full story,
yeah,
especially when it comes to like school. So it's like you got to really like be able to kind of dig into it yourself and kind of search for the truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But that goes back to kind of like what I was trying to explain before. Is like I feel like, you know, with them trying to implement or take out, you know, with the whole critical race theory in itself is like, regardless of what it is that they're teaching us in class as students, as children, we still have to do that much more research on everything that we need to know in between, because one is there's not enough time, okay, for them to, even if they wanted to, how could they? You know what I mean?
Put that much information in a book and try to be able to teach it in a course in a certain amount of given time. Absolutely.
But the other part of that is the sensitivity to it. Like I was explaining before, is like, I don't know, how do you implement something that is to the extent of what it actually is when you don't have enough time, and then to put in the information that I guess is what they take out or kind of gloss across, if you will, in the textbook. How do you decipher that importance?
That, and then also having like teachers that are prepared to even be able to like deliver it in a way where, you know, the children can actually like absorb it in the way that they need to see it. You know, absorb the information in the way that they need to see it. So that too, like you don't have teachers that's fully capable of even teaching history and delve into it to that degree too as well. Yeah. You know.
Instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by Roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible. Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples. The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yall swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda, the Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba, and the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that, as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before.
Wow.
Yeah, this is deep. Just really, again, like I said, just getting that deeper perspective in regards to like the origin. And I think that's very, very important too, is just understanding like the origin. Sometimes I feel like people pick up in different places, you know, throughout history regarding slavery without completely understanding like its origin. And I feel like you can't really completely know something about a subject if you don't completely know like the origin of it and how it kind of evolved and trickulated into what it became once they got to America. You see what I'm saying?
So, but did he say?
You gotta understand it.
Maybe I missed it, but did he say why they were why the Europeans were going to Africa to get more slaves? Because every country, like he said, was enslaving like their own slaves, but they were going to Africa, on the coast of Africa. Here's what he said: they were leaving, like they would go and leave like the next day. But why were they going there to get more slaves? Like,
just because that's where they will go and pick them up. Obviously, they're not going to go into Africa to get them because of, like they said, the life expectancy of a white man or a white male.
right?
So that they were just going to the coast. That's where the slave trade was being taken place, as far as probably other Africans enslaving other Africans and then selling them.
Yeah,
see
right.
What I'm saying?
Right.
So that's where they're at on the coast. So that's
Dang.
just where they're going to do the slave trade. You know.
Yeah.
Where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts.
Wow.
An estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured. How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came.
See, that part is very, very important. And a lot of people, like I said, throughout history, just, you know, this is a good, like, history lesson in a quick 8 minutes, but this is like great information for somebody to take, especially if you're trying to dive more into like slavery, like it being discussed in schools like that. Like you really got to understand like what they're speaking about. Like I said, just the origin
So it's almost like it took place because everybody was allowing it to go on, and nobody was really defending that it was wrong because they were benefiting from it too. Black people were benefiting.
Everybody was benefiting from whatever nation you were from. You like I said, the Arabs, Europeans, Africans, even like to the Caribbeans, things of that nature.
Yeah,
you know? So
where he said it was even more popular or more
Chinese.
Yeah, Asians and capturing Asians and
Or Asians,
wow, whew, yeah. I did not see, which is okay. I'll let it finish first.
And also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
Man.
See, now, again, like I said,
whoa.
And whoever suggested this too, it was really, really good that they suggested this coming off of the other video that we did. Just like I said, so you can get a even wider spectrum. Because like I said, what Ben Shapiro and what Malcolm, what they were kind of talking about, like they kind of were just touching on it, you know, that kind of at the surface level.
Yeah.
You know, in regards to how it needs to be taught in schools and things of that nature. But one thing that you can take from just listening to this here, there's no way that you can actually really like teach slavery from this standpoint in school. I feel like that you can't, because it's too much. You know, you're gonna have to like redo the whole like curriculum in regards to like history if you're gonna incorporate slavery, because there, you know, the current history books right now it's so outdated.
Yeah,
it doesn't even provide the type of information that you're going to get out of this particular documentary that we just listened to. So
which also makes it feel like, you know, it's okay. Like in a sense, it's almost like, okay, well, this makes it a little bit better to talk about in the sense that it's coming from every race, every culture, every ethnicity had this going on in their countries, like in terms of like the origination part of it. So it's just like, you know, it doesn't make it, I mean, still there were all these horrific stories. People, you know, like he was just saying, women trying to hold on to their husbands or to their men and hang on to their babies. Like, I mean, I can only imagine the stories behind that. Now that part of it, that's the part where I'm just like, okay, that's when you know what I mean? That's why I feel like it starts getting into the sensitivity parts of it and the things that are hard to talk about. You know what I mean? But do you talk about that within each race, each culture, each, you know, everywhere?
And you can speak about that in a general terms in regards to like the atrocities of it and the trauma behind it, you know? But yeah, I mean, it's just a very, very interesting topic when you bring up like facts about slavery and things that never get mentioned in the school books and in the textbooks. And even me, from a personal standpoint, I didn't even realize a lot of it until I got out of school, you know, and had an opportunity to really like dive into history a little bit more. Yeah. So for me, it was like going out of high school before I just really understood like the full magnitude and like detail for detail, all the little meticulous details about slavery, things that you're not going to get in the textbooks. Like I had to learn that outside of school.
Right. Yeah. Which is what goes back to what I was saying before. It's so much information about it, regardless. Like, so how much of it can you actually put into a textbook? And how much time?
It is.
The time. You know what I
mean? It's really a time thing too. And then like you said, a sensitivity type of thing. That's
the information, the actual the details of it. I think.
And then you gotta understand who's writing the history too, because whoever's writing the history, they're only gonna want to write what they want you to know. So you know, you have to really like dig and dive and delve into it. You know,
exactly right.
Way further than a skin level.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely. So hey, y'all let us know what y'all think about this. Like, is there any more, you know, information, anybody else y'all would like us to check out? I'd be more than happy to tap into them. Like I said, this is a journey, so
It is. It is.
Y'all let us know.
Even in this documentary, I picked up a few things that just kind of hit me where I'm like, okay, I didn't know
treat you a
that,
little bit, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So if y'all enjoyed this video, be sure you give us a big thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe,
Absolutely.
smash that notification bell, y'all. Join the family. And if ain't nobody else told you, I love you. And we're gonna see y'all in the next video, y'all.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Peace and blessings.
Hornback tipped $4.20.
Trusting you, it ain't worth much, but it's just what I need lately. I won't